resume recording. Yeah, I'll just do it on my machine, Ione, that'll be faster. Okay, we're recording now.
Great, thanks, Shannon. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is a webinar regarding the Comox Valley Regional District's Agricultural Plan Update. We are June 8th, 2023. We've reserved 2 hours for this session. We may or may not need the whole amount of time, but we will be doing a presentation followed by discussion. And I want to first make note that we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we are gathering, that is on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, who are the traditional keepers of this land. Just as an agenda to review with you, we will do a welcome. The agricultural plan's objectives will be reviewed, and we're going to provide some feedback and discussion on the themed workshops that took place last month. And then talk a little bit about potential additional themes. And once that formal presentation component is over, I will stop sharing my screen and we will stop recording, and then we'll be able to discuss some questions together as well as next steps. So just to remind you who's leading the project from an organizational perspective, there's myself from Upland Consulting. I'm based in Sechelt on the Sunshine Coast. Jeanine de La Salle is also with us today. She is based in Vernon. And then we have a couple other team members, Caslin Bonner, who's with us today. She's based in Victoria, and Sydney Hinachik, who is based in Calgary. On the CVRD side, Lisa Kilpatrick is here, as well as Jody McLean. So just to provide a review of the objectives of the agricultural plan, there's one key goal. That goal is to create a comprehensive agricultural planning document that will focus on the jurisdiction that the regional district has and provide guidance for identifying opportunities to strengthen the regional agricultural sector, as well as to contribute to its longer-term sustainability. Within that goal, there are 4 objectives that have been embedded. The first is to review relevant information. And with that in mind, the consulting team did produce a background report, which is available online on the CVRD's agricultural plan website. The second objective was to assess and evaluate the older agricultural plan from 20 years ago. And that was undertaken and done in a detailed manner. And the results of that are included in the draft interim report, which is also available on the website. The third objective is to engage the agricultural community. That started last year, which we are calling round 1 of engagement, and it involved interviewing some key members of the agricultural sector, as well as engaging with a steering committee for the project. And round 2, which is currently underway, involved hosting 4 facilitated themed discussion sessions at Merville Community Hall last month, as well as this webinar. And there is a survey which is also available online for anyone who would like to participate through an online fashion as well. Lastly, the key objective will be to update and modernize the agricultural plan. So our key deliverable at the end of this process is an engagement summary report and a final interim report, which will be used to inform the next stage, which would be updating the agricultural plan itself. Wanted to just spend a quick minute discussing the overall role of agricultural plans. For many of you who are not familiar with local and regional planning, agricultural plans can play a critical role in providing that necessary overview and profile of the agricultural sector. So it provides context to the regional planning community so that there's a good understanding of what constitutes the agriculture and agri-food sector in the region. Agricultural plans also provide an opportunity to engage with producers as well as the larger ag sector, such as processors, to develop a vision and key directions for agriculture in the region. And they contain recommended goals and actions, specifically those that are related to actions that are within the jurisdiction of local governments, with a timeline framework of about 10 to 15 years. And those recommended goals and actions are then set out in a prioritized implementation plan that looks at several phases, short, medium, and long term, to bridge the planning and the implementation gap. I wanted to also provide a quick review of the older agricultural plan, which was produced over the course of 2 years from 2000 to 2002. There were 3 key components of the previous agricultural plan. One was a history and resources production, which is similar to the background report that we've produced. The second was an issues and opportunities report, which is similar to the engagement summary that we are producing. And then lastly, the plan itself. We went through and dissected the older plan. There were 100 actions total embedded within that plan, and about a third of them had been implemented. And the key challenge or barrier to implementing the remaining 2/3 of the actions is because they had been allocated to organizations, agencies, or levels of government that the local government or the CVRD did not have control over, which is why for this updated version, we're really focusing hard on issues that are within the jurisdiction of the CVRD. The 6 themes of the previous agricultural plan are interestingly quite aligned with what we're hearing from the community now, 20 years later. So they were key issues or themes around water management, land management, environmental stewardship, agricultural business viability, food security, food safety, food quality, as well as awareness and promotion. I mentioned that we've completed a background report. So components of the background report included a review of the historical and pre-colonial food production system. There's also a section that was created by a consultant who works for Comox First Nation regarding the Indigenous food system. We took a look at the biophysical context for agriculture within the Comox Valley, including water resources, soil, weather, and climate change. And we also used existing statistics through Statistics Canada's agricultural census, through the province's agricultural land use inventory, and through BC assessment regarding BC tax status, property information to create a profile around the economics of agriculture in the region. And from that, we distilled a set of opportunities and challenges that were vetted through the engagement process itself. Our initial findings through this work is that the agricultural community in the Comox Valley is extremely passionate, which is a strength, although sometimes that passion can lead to diverging views on issues that affect the agricultural community. We found that there is a strong diversity in the types of agriculture going on in the market and retail opportunities and existing connections in the food chain, and that builds resilience within the food system itself. We also found that climate change, and specifically how the climate change patterns are affecting water, are a key concern for the agricultural sector. Farmland protection and the need to direct urban growth into urban centers remains top of mind for the agricultural community, and succession planning along with supporting new entrants is also a key concern. I wanted to switch gears here and provide a bit of a recap from the themed workshops. So just to remind you, there were 4 themed workshops that were facilitated during the month of May. They were held in person at Merville Hall. The first was around land use planning, and some of the key issues that we heard both from the speakers and from the audience is that there is a need to restrict development of residential urban uses into existing urban areas in order to protect the wider agricultural land base. There's also concerns at the same time that on-farm housing limitations, which are primarily being directed by the Provincial Agricultural Land Commission, can create challenges for farm succession planning or multi-generational farms. There is an interest in having some stronger compliance and enforcement regarding existing bylaws to keep non-farm uses off of farmland, and better protection from recreational trail users is needed for farms, particularly those who abut or adjacent to existing trails. The second session that we focused on was around emergency planning and preparedness. We heard from the discussion at that event that in addition to considering the needs of agriculture during an emergency, there's an opportunity to consider local food production as a key food security opportunity during an emergency, meaning that there is a need for some storage and facilitation and coordination around the food being produced locally to be used during an emergency. And that also there's a need for considering food storage for livestock as well, assuming that roads may be blocked or other opportunities to bring supplies in and out may be hampered. And lastly, we heard interest in the ability to include hobby farms or rural non-farming properties within the ALR and explain, have a better explanation as to their role and how they might be involved in emergency management and emergency planning so that they don't become a hindrance to any plans or coordination in place during an actual emergency. The third session was around water management, and specifically, we took the opportunity to revisit the Solom River Agricultural Watershed Management Plan, which was developed only 2 years ago with a lot of input from the farming community. We didn't want to simply redo that and have people come and rehash the plan, but we did want to take the opportunity to try to prioritize some of the key findings in that report to determine what remains relevant today. And the key things that came to the top here were around access to water being the most important consideration for farm viability, that there's a need to prioritize the agricultural water usage in land use planning. So looking at land use planning primarily from that water usage lens, and also a need to better understand the viability and opportunities for on-farm water storage with potential role for advocacy to the province around when permitting and authorizations are required for things like dugouts. Our fourth and final session that we held was on business viability, where we took a look at the economic viability of businesses related to agriculture and agri-food in the region. Some of the things that were raised was around the need for a permanent location for a year-round farmers market and how that's an issue that's come and gone repeatedly over several decades, and that it would be of interest for the whole community to find a solution to this need. There was also discussion around on-farm insurance rates, which are continued to be challenging, and this represents potentially another advocacy area for the CVRD. And that labor retention challenges are a concern, and that is also related to the ability to house people on farms for labor purposes. So that's just a recap of the 4 sessions that were held last month. We had about between 10 and 20 people attend each session, and there were some discussion questions that people filled out as well. And those discussions are now online on the CVRD's agricultural plan website for those who are interested in filling out those questions online as well. The presentations are also available on the website.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know, I think we have our chat enabled. So just to let people know, that should be working.
Okay, great. Thank you. Should I check the chat now or should we wait till the end?
No, you keep going.
Okay. So we are also aware that there are topics that didn't necessarily fit into the tidy 4 boxes of land use planning, emergency planning, water management, and business viability. These are issues that have come up in our discussions with the Farmers Institutes, for example, in interviewing key members of the agri-food sector and in more informal conversations with those involved in agriculture in the Comox Valley. So we wanted to list a few of the top issues that have arisen and talk a little bit more about them later on in the session. So the first one that came up quite a bit is around urban agriculture and trying to get a sense of how that fits in an agricultural plan itself and what the role is for urban agriculture, not only for food security, but also for creating a basis for support for agricultural sector support businesses as well. Another issue that came up was around, and this is tied somewhat into climate change adaptation and mitigation, was this idea of payment for ecosystem services, the ability to recognize and compensate producers for the good work that they're doing, for example, protecting riparian areas or other ecological areas of high value. Thirdly, we wanted to acknowledge that recognizing the current role of agriculture in mitigating climate change impacts is also important. We often hear a lot about how agriculture is playing a role in climate change or GHG production. However, there's lots of opportunities to argue that a strengthened local food system can also lead to minimizing GHG emissions by keeping the food produced and processed closer to the consumer. There is an opportunity to discuss education and communication to the wider public about the farming sector, and this may lead to greater understanding of normal farm practices and ways to minimize potential friction that may arise between the uses, for example, of recreational trails or other non-farm users close to farmland. And lastly, there's an opportunity to, I think, invigorate the agricultural community's contribution to the overall fabric of the region by celebrating the good work that's being done. And so that was acknowledged as an opportunity to bring that into the agricultural plan as well. So things to think about. Potential additional themes to consider for a future agricultural plan would be around education. So education opportunities both internally for CVRD staff and elected officials, but also externally to the wider public and the community and to the agricultural sector itself. Communication, so how to provide centralized information, opportunities, recognizing and celebrating agriculture, perhaps, a Farmer of the Year award or something like that, that can be done in a positive fashion. Advocacy, which I mentioned a few times. So which are the areas that might be outside of the CVRD's direct jurisdiction, but are creating enough of a concern for the farm sector that it needs to be brought to these wider levels of government. Fourth, the opportunity to look at further research and opportunities for innovation, technology, and emerging products, and contemplating the role that local government may have there. So one thing to consider in your feedback is around whether or not you have any comment for those themes or what could be included. And I also just want to go through these questions so that those who watch the recording can think about how they would like to answer them and provide their feedback. And then we'll stop the recording and get more into the small group discussion. But some of the questions that we're interested in hearing from the community are whether or not you have any specific questions or comments on those current 4 theme areas that we presented on, whether or not you have any comment on the other potential opportunities for themes for the plan, such as education, communication, advocacy, and research. And then questions specifically around the role of the Comox Valley Regional District. So for example, what could best help the regional district become a sector partner? Some examples that have been brought up so far in our discussions are around creating an agricultural service, looking at economic development as a stronger opportunity to bring in agriculture, reworking the agriculture coordinator position, looking at internal education or awareness raising. And secondly, what initiatives already exist that could benefit from CVRD support and what might that look like? And lastly, what strategies could be taken to identify and take actions around topics of common ground? So those are some of the questions that we're hoping to be able to discuss with you. And I just wanted to also post the link here to that website. And if you Google CVRD agriculture, it will come up right away as well. And there's a link to the survey on the project website too. You can also choose to send in written feedback by email or drop it off to Jody McLean. So we want to make sure that there's lots of opportunities for feedback to come in. And just to remind you that the input needs to be received by the end of June 2023. So with that in mind, we'll open things up to the chat. And I think, Shannon, you can probably stop recording.